Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Story Lab. Have you ever walked into a coffee shop thinking it was just another ordinary day and walked out feeling completely different? Have you ever met someone by accident only to realize later that nothing about it was accidental? Today's story is called At the Coffee Shop. This is a shadowing English story for B2 to C1 learners. Listen carefully. Pause the video. Repeat after me. Copy the pronunciation, the rhythm, and the emotion. Now, let's begin. It was not a special morning. That's how most life-changing moments begin. Quietly. My name is Elena. I am 29 years old, and I work as a content strategist for a digital media company in Chicago. My days are usually structured, predictable, and carefully planned. I wake up at 6:30, answer emails before breakfast, and reach the office by 8:30 sharp. But that Tuesday, my routine collapsed. Our biggest client had just canceled a contract. Months of preparation had disappeared overnight. My manager called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. The room was tense. Everyone looked exhausted before the day had even begun. By 10 a.m., I felt drained. I needed air, I needed space, I needed silence. So I left the building and walked 3 blocks down to a small independent coffee shop I rarely visited. It was quiet, warm, and slightly hidden between two large corporate offices. When I opened the door, a soft bell rang above me. The smell of roasted coffee beans wrapped around me like comfort. The shop was not crowded. A few people sat with laptops. A couple was whispering in the corner. Light jazz music played in the background. For the first time that day, my breathing slowed down. I ordered a black coffee. "No sugar," I said. The barista nodded and handed me the cup. As I turned to find a seat, I noticed that almost every table was taken, except one small wooden table near the window. But someone was already sitting there. He looked up as I approached. "Is this seat taken?" I asked politely. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Not at all." He closed his notebook slightly, as if protecting whatever he had been writing. "Thank you," I said, sitting down. At first, we ignored each other. I opened my laptop and tried to respond to emails, but my mind refused to cooperate. I kept rereading the same sentence without understanding it. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Rough morning?" I looked up. I must have looked worse than I thought. "That obvious?" I replied. He smiled faintly. "You've been staring at that screen for 5 minutes without typing?" I closed my laptop. "Work crisis," I said. "You." He glanced at his notebook. "Personal crisis," he answered calmly. There was something in his tone. Not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. I studied him more carefully. He looked around 32. Well-dressed, but not overly formal. His eyes were tired, but not weak. More thoughtful than exhausted. "What kind of crisis?" I asked, surprising myself. Usually I don't ask strangers personal questions, but something about that space felt different. He leaned back slightly. "I just quit my job," he said. That caught my attention. "Voluntarily?" I asked. "Yes." "Why?" He took a slow breath. "Because I realized I was successful, but deeply unhappy." The words settled between us. Successful, but deeply unhappy. I knew that feeling. "I thought quitting would feel freeing," he continued. "Instead, it feels terrifying." I nodded slowly. "Security is addictive," I said, "even when it makes you miserable." He looked at me with quiet interest. "Exactly." For a moment we sat in silence again, but it was not uncomfortable. It was reflective. Outside the window, people rushed past, unaware that inside this small coffee shop, two strangers were dissecting their lives. "What do you do?" he asked. "I create digital campaigns for brands that sell things people don't really need," I said dryly. He laughed softly. "At least you're honest. What about you?" "I was a corporate lawyer." "Was? You sound certain," I observed. "I am," he replied. "I don't want that life anymore." "And what life do you want?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet." That vulnerability made him human. We often admire people who have a clear vision, but rarely do we admit how lost we feel when we abandon the familiar. "I envy you," I said quietly. "Why?" "Because you were brave enough to walk away." He studied me carefully. "And you?" he asked. "What are you afraid to walk away from?" The question hit harder than I expected. My job was stable. It paid well, it looked impressive on paper. But lately, I had felt invisible inside it. "I'm afraid of failing," I admitted. "If I leave and it doesn't work out, I'll prove everyone right." "Right about what?" "That safe choices are smarter than bold ones." He leaned forward slightly. "And what if safe choices slowly erase who you are?" The coffee between my hands had grown cold. I had walked into that coffee shop to escape a stressful morning. Instead, I was confronting parts of myself I had carefully avoided. We spoke for almost an hour about expectations, about ambition, about the pressure to appear stable even when you feel lost. At some point, I forgot he was a stranger. Or maybe that was the point. Strangers sometimes see us more clearly because they have no history with us. When I finally checked the time, I realized I was late for another meeting. "I should go," I said reluctantly. "Me too," he replied. We both stood. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me that uncertainty isn't weakness." I smiled faintly. "And thank you," I said, "for asking uncomfortable questions." He hesitated. "I'm Marcus, by the way." "Elena." We shook hands. His grip was steady. As I walked back to the office, the city looked slightly different. The crisis at work had not disappeared. My responsibilities had not changed. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt trapped. I felt awake. That evening, instead of staying late to prove my dedication, I went home early. I opened a notebook, not a corporate strategy document, my own notebook, and I wrote one question at the top of the page. If I weren't afraid of failing, what would I choose? Sometimes transformation does not arrive dramatically. Sometimes it begins at a small wooden table in a quiet coffee shop with black coffee and a stranger who asks the right question. The following days refused to return to normal. Externally, nothing had changed. I still attended meetings. I still created strategy documents. I still responded to emails filled with polite urgency and hidden panic. But internally, something had shifted. Marcus's question lingered in my mind like background noise I could not turn off. If you weren't afraid of failing, what would you choose? At first, I dismissed it as a passing conversation, an intense but temporary exchange between two strangers who happened to share a table. Yet every time I opened my laptop at work, the question resurfaced. During presentations, while my colleagues discussed recovery strategies for our lost client, I found myself drifting, not physically, mentally. I began to notice how often I said yes when I wanted to say no, how often I defended ideas I did not fully believe in, how frequently I equated exhaustion with achievement. It was uncomfortable. Awareness often is. 3 days later, I returned to the same coffee shop. I told myself it was for the quiet environment. But if I were honest, I was curious. When I pushed the door open, the same soft bell rang. The smell of coffee felt familiar now. Safe. I ordered the same black coffee. And there he was, sitting at the same table. This time, he looked up immediately. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You're very confident." "No," he replied calmly. "Just observant." I sat down. "You quit your job?" I said. "Why are you still in the city?" He smiled faintly. "Because quitting a job doesn't mean quitting a life overnight." "Fair point." He closed his notebook, less protective this time. "And you?" he asked. "Did you answer the question?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I'm still afraid." "Of what exactly?" I considered his words carefully. "Of disappointing people, of wasting my degree, of realizing that I'm not as talented as I imagine." He nodded slowly. "Fear disguises itself as responsibility," he said. "It convinces you that staying safe is the mature choice." "And it isn't?" I asked. "It depends," he replied. "Is safety serving you or suffocating you?" The distinction was subtle but powerful. I watched people pass outside the window. Some moved quickly as if late. Others walked slowly, absorbed in their phones. "I built my career around stability," I said. "My parents sacrificed a lot for my education. Walking away feels selfish." Marcus leaned back in his chair. Or it might be honest. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "What are you planning to do?" I asked him. He hesitated, as though choosing his words with care. "I've always wanted to teach," he said. "Not law, philosophy." I blinked. "Philosophy?" "Yes." "That's quite a shift." He laughed softly. "Tell me about it." "Why didn't you pursue that before?" "Because law was respectable, profitable, predictable." He paused. Philosophy felt uncertain. And now? Now uncertainty feels more truthful than comfort. His words unsettled me in the best possible way. We continued talking, not about careers alone, but about identity, about how easily we confuse what we do with who we are. I realized that I had introduced myself as a content strategist for years, but rarely as Elena, the person behind the job title. "What did you want to be when you were younger?" Marcus asked suddenly. The question felt almost naive. "I wanted to write," I said slowly. "Not marketing copy, stories, essays, something meaningful." "And why didn't you?" "Because writing doesn't guarantee income." He studied me quietly. "And does marketing guarantee fulfillment?" I laughed softly. "No." The honesty felt strangely liberating. Before leaving, he said something that lingered even longer than his first question. "Don't make a decision out of fear," he said. "Make it out of clarity." That night, I opened my notebook again. Instead of asking what I would choose without fear, I wrote something else. What am I postponing because it feels inconvenient? The answer came quickly. I had been postponing myself. The following week, I made a small but deliberate decision. Not dramatic, not reckless. I requested a meeting with my manager. When I entered her office, my heart was pounding. "I'd like to reduce my hours," I said carefully. "I want to pursue a personal project." She looked surprised. "You're one of our strongest team members," she said. "I'm not leaving," I clarified. "I just need space to grow in another direction." It was the most honest sentence I had spoken in months. To my surprise, she did not reject the idea. "It will affect your salary," she warned. "I understand." The conversation was professional, but inside I felt something shifting again. Not chaos, not rebellion, alignment. That evening, I returned to the coffee shop once more. Marcus noticed the difference immediately. "You look lighter," he observed. "I made a decision," I said. "Ah," he replied, smiling slightly. "And?" "I chose not to wait." He raised his coffee cup. "To not waiting." We clinked our cups together gently. For the first time in a long while, the future felt uncertain, but not threatening. It felt open. And perhaps that was the point. 2 weeks passed, and the rhythm of my life began to rearrange itself. Reducing my hours at work created a strange kind of silence in my schedule. For years, my calendar had been overcrowded, meetings overlapping, deadlines colliding, constant digital notifications demanding attention. Now, there were empty spaces. At first, the emptiness felt uncomfortable. Then it became necessary. I started spending my mornings writing at the coffee shop, not marketing drafts, not brand strategies, essays, observations, personal reflections I had postponed for years. Marcus was there often, but not always. When he was absent, I didn't feel disappointed. Instead, I felt focused. One morning, however, the chair across from me remained empty for hours. By noon, I began to suspect something had changed. When he finally walked in, there was a subtle heaviness in his posture. "You're late," I said, half joking. "I had an interview," he replied. My pen paused mid-sentence. "For a law firm?" "No." He placed his bag down and looked directly at me. "For a teaching position." The air between us shifted. "Where?" I asked. "Boston." The word landed softly but decisively. "That's far." "Yes." There was no dramatics in his voice, just fact. "When would you leave?" "If I accept, in 3 weeks." 3 weeks. It was remarkable how quickly a connection can feel significant, even when it's built over coffee and conversation rather than shared history. "And are you going to accept?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said finally. "It feels right, but leaving also means stepping into uncertainty without a safety net." I almost laughed at the irony. "That sounds familiar," I said. He smiled. "Exactly." For a moment, we sat in silence, each absorbing the possibility of change. "Would you regret it if you didn't go?" I asked quietly. He studied the table. "Yes." The certainty in his answer surprised even him. "Then you already know," I said. He looked up. "And you?" he asked. "Would you regret staying exactly where you are?" The question was no longer theoretical. I considered my recent decisions: reducing work hours, writing daily, reclaiming space in my life. It was progress. But was it enough? "I don't want to build a life around fear anymore," I said. "But I also don't want to chase change just to prove something." "That's the difference between reaction and intention," Marcus replied. "One is impulsive, the other is deliberate." Over the next week, the coffee shop became less about habit and more about transition. Marcus accepted the position in Boston. When he told me, there was no dramatic music playing in the background, no cinematic rainfall, just the steady hum of espresso machines. "I'm proud of you," I said sincerely. "Thank you," he replied. "I think you helped me decide." "I did? You reminded me that postponing yourself becomes a pattern if you're not careful." His words mirrored my own transformation. We had influenced each other without planning to. On his last day in the city, the coffee shop felt different, familiar, yet temporary. "I used to think courage meant making big, dramatic moves," he said. "Quitting jobs, changing cities, starting over." "And now?" Now I think courage is consistency, showing up for what you believe in, even when it's inconvenient. I nodded slowly. I used to think fulfillment was something external, I admitted. A promotion, recognition, stability. And now I think it's alignment. When what you do matches who you are. He smiled. Look at us, he said, philosophizing over coffee. We both laughed softly, but beneath the humor, there was recognition. Something had changed permanently. As he stood to leave, there was no dramatic embrace, no promises of visiting every month, just honesty. Keep writing, he said. You keep teaching, I replied. He extended his hand. Then, after a brief pause, he pulled me into a quick, warm hug. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For reminding me that fear isn't a life plan. When he walked out of the coffee shop, I didn't chase him. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt anchored. That evening, I stayed longer than usual. I opened my notebook and began writing a new piece. Not about Marcus, not about change, but about the subtle transformations that happen when we allow ourselves to question the roles we've accepted without examination. Weeks passed. My writing improved. Not dramatically overnight, but steadily. I submitted essays to small publications. Some were rejected. A few were accepted. The first time I saw my name published under a thoughtful piece, not marketing copy, I felt a quiet pride that no promotion had ever delivered. At work, I was still competent, still professional, but I was no longer defined exclusively by that environment. One afternoon, months later, I received a message. It was from Marcus, a photo of a classroom, sunlight streaming through tall windows, a whiteboard covered in philosophical questions. Underneath the image, he wrote, "First semester complete, hard, worth it." I smiled. I replied with a photo of my laptop screen showing my latest published essay. First year writing seriously, scary, worth it. There was no grand romantic conclusion to our story. We didn't reunite dramatically. We didn't promise forever. What we shared was influence, perspective, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful encounters are temporary. Not because they lack depth, but because their purpose is transformation, not permanence. The coffee shop still stands on that corner. I still visit sometimes, not because I'm waiting for someone, but because it reminds me of the moment I stopped postponing myself. And every time I sit at that table, I remember something essential. Life rarely changes in loud, dramatic explosions. More often, it shifts quietly, over conversations, over questions, over cups of coffee. And if you're willing to listen carefully enough, you might realize that the most important decision isn't about where you work or where you live. It's about whether you are living in alignment with who you truly are. And that realization, once discovered, is impossible to ignore. So that was the story of At the Coffee Shop. It wasn't just about a meeting in a cafe. It was about fear, courage, and choosing alignment over comfort. Now let's practice. Listen again. Pause after each sentence. Repeat it out loud. Copy the pronunciation, the rhythm, and the emotion. Focus on the advanced vocabulary and sentence structures. This is how you build real fluency. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who wants to improve their English. This is Easy English Story Lab. See you in the next story.